This portion of the podcast will be about history, and I'm going to be talking about Black history. And in talking about Black history, I'd like to talk about slavery. And so, one of the aspects of slavery I'm going to be talking about is a slave ship in particular called the Hannibal. So, this is actually an account of Captain Phillips. He was the captain of the Hannibal, and he wrote of his feelings about how to punish potential ringleaders. So somehow the slave ships would communicate with one another about different things that would happen on their ships and what to look out for. And so they knew in kidnapping Africans and selling to the New World that the closer they were to Africa, more people would try to escape. And so it was pretty disturbing because in this article, Captain Phillips talks about precautions that he took so that an uprising wouldn't happen. So he actually spoke about facing the cannons in this ship towards the lower deck area where the African slaves were kept. And so the women and children were kept at the top and the men were kept at the bottom, chained the entire time. So the women and children were able to move about, but the men were chained in close captivity. I'm going to throw up a picture. I remember seeing this picture before, but I don't think I really understood the gravity of what I was looking at. These are all humans being closely put together. And so most times white slavers would put more slaves. They would kidnap more than the ship would actually be designed for. And even though the ship was very poorly designed, they would still cram as many African slaves that they could capture. And they did this because they knew that a lot of Africans did not survive the Middle Passage, the trip from West Africa to the New World, which is the America actually. And so it was really, really disturbing to read that piece of information because it seemed to be largely based off of greed, largely based off of just money. That was, the goal. And it seemed like once laws permitted anyone to be a captain of a slave ship, which a lot of them were psychopaths, truly. For example, so Captain Phillips wrote about a captain who basically suggested to him what he should do if an uprising should happen. And basically the ones that would cause the uprising, he suggested that cut the slaves up limb by limb and then throw the body parts in front of the other slaves to scare them. But this, you have to think of it as in a crime you would hear about today. Cutting up someone is a crime. Kidnapping someone is a crime. He said that would stop any uprising. That's what Captain Phillips wrote from another captain who suggested to him what he should do. And it's really disturbing because that wouldn't just scare anyone. That would totally paralyze and traumatize someone, literally. And with the conditions of the ship, there was nowhere to use the bathroom. There was nowhere to bathe, to maintain your hygiene, to be able to change into clean clothes. And where they had the men, first of all, the poorly designed ship, the area where they had the men, where it was likely an area where they had the cannons and barrels. It's not an area where anything living could survive. And they didn't care. They still kept these men chained up and they kept them separate from the women and children. And this is all psychological because if a man was chained up and his wife and children were on the boat somewhere, but he couldn't get to him, he was probably too sick to even comprehend where he was or what was going on. I mean, of course, you have to think of it as the climate was so tropical that it was so hot that the way that they stacked the African slaves on the ship was inhumane, cruel, and demonic. Some were so stacked, like some ships were so stacked up that the skin of the individuals that would chafe against the boat, the skin would come off of the person that would be to the edge of the boat, that would be positioned at the edge of the boat. And though they had doctors, the doctors, there's accounts of doctors where there's nothing that they could do. They could barely survive going up under there and looking at everyone. They couldn't even get to people because the stench, the heat. And of course, what happens when people don't have anywhere to properly bathe or use the bathroom or any of those things that a human being would need? Disease happens, and that's what happened, and that's what killed off a lot of people. The climate, the disease, unsanitary conditions, the stress, the trauma. Suicide was there. Suicide was something that people considered due to the hell that they were in. And that's why I really take offense to people who think suicide is weak, that think people are weak, and somehow the person running their mouths thinks that they're strong. Well, that not in my book. The person constantly running their mouth is the weakest one. If you don't even know how to shut your mouth, then to me, that's weak. But the women were violated. The women were raped. So some women were captured already pregnant. So their pregnancies were not successful. They would lose their babies. A lot of them would lose their babies. And the women and children were allowed to roam freely, but there were women that were raped. And actually, rape was used as a punishment, as a way to break the spirit. And women will become pregnant and of the captain or crew members. And I remember reading in the article that there was complaints from the people that bought the slaves. There would be complaints that the babies are coming out mixed, aka mulatto. And I'm actually going to get into that in my next podcast, just talking about mulattoes, those that are lighter skinned, where that comes from. No, I don't know everything. No, I don't know the entire history of it, but I know what I need to know to talk about it. And so, the Hannibal. This ship was very disturbing. Not like all slave ships were disturbing. I want to read this. All slave ships carried instruments of torture. Common punishments to subjugate the enslaved were public whippings, torture with thumb screws, rape, and a device used to enable force feeding. Even I read that the captain would have the slaves come up in groups and basically have them dance as a form of exercising. And so, I look at that and I think about that. How did the captain and crew exercise? Did they dance? Did they dance as a way to exercise? No, likely they didn't. They probably did other forms of exercise. But to have groups of people dancing as a way of exercise, it just added to the humiliation, the disrespect. And, I think about this and I think that, like, if a law told someone that it was right, no matter what they felt inside, if they felt like if it was a way that they could earn money and it was legal, they were happy to do it.